As you can see, the Economic Commission for Africa has 14 countries in the sub-region that we cover under this office. This is the fastest growing sub-region on the continent. Today, this East Africa region is growing at about 6.4%. We expect it to grow at 6.5% by 2020. It is, of course, the jewel of the continent. The overall continent is only growing at 3.4%. Altogether, Africa needs to grow at about 10% to create jobs. When we look at the East Africa region as well, we have two other challenges. We must create almost 8.5 million jobs a year to be able to absorb the youth that are getting into the job market. That is a huge challenge, and that is why we are here today. Is essentially to say, what is the economic blueprint that we can produce that will allow for us to be able to create the kinds of jobs that are needed. With a combined GDP of about $880 billion and a population of 420 million, this region is a region that can grow Africa. It is a region that holds the promise for what the youth are looking for. But it is a region that cannot do that if our leaders do not make the right policy decisions. And I think by signing the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement on the 21st of March 2018 in Kigali, African countries and African leaders came together to give and to offer this region and the rest of Africa a blueprint for that growth. The African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is not just another trade agreement. It is essentially the investment program for Africa. It is the investment program for job creation. It is an investment program for regional integration, for how we as a continent collectively can realize the dream of a prosperous Africa. With the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, Africa can grow and Africa can double its growth. The struggles that we see today in terms of achieving growth and creating jobs for our youth could be something of the past if we actually worked together to exploit the benefits of the Free Trade Area Agreement. Despite low per capita incomes, over the past decade, the East Africa region has emerged again as one of our fastest growing regions. Its current dynamism has, however, been led mostly by consumption and not investment. And I think this is the difference with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, is that we can actually begin to boost our growth with investment, and with investment comes job creation. And with job creation, of course, prosperity. None of this, of course, can happen without peace. And I think one of the reasons we are here, and we must not just sort of put that on the side, is because there has been peace. And I think for those of us who live in Ethiopia, we come here, of course, celebrating the recent international recognition of the fact that peace is what has opened up a discussion across the continent. Just last week, I was in Sudan, again, because we have been able to restore peace. Also in South Sudan, in Darfur, working to ensure that this part of the continent can actually grow and deliver the promise that we are expecting. So with peace coming much more into the fore, we believe that talking about economics must be the next best thing that we can do to ensure that the dividends of peace deliver the growth and the welfare for the billions that we have. We know, because of the analysis that we do at the Economic Commission for Africa, that the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement stands to deliver about $1.8 billion worth of additional revenue to the continent and can create about 2 million jobs a year just with the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. This is without thinking about all the other externalities that it will deliver. We stand today in Eritrea. A big part of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is going to be services, the delivery of goods, logistics. You have a port. We know today that on the continent, we are one of the continents that is building the most number of ports because we're beginning to trade more with each other. But we're coming from a very, very low. Africa as a whole, as we know, is not trading enough with itself. And therein lies the power of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. If we can do more to trade with ourselves, if we can exploit the possibilities of the ports of Eritrea to connect landlocked countries like Ethiopia and others, and ensure that we trade more with ourselves, we will be able to not only benefit from the trade, but benefit from the external services that come with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Tourism. Yes, we are here today in Eritrea to talk about economics, But I think, as our resident coordinator said, go out and visit, because the Horn of Africa and East Africa also has a lot of tourist potential, and we hope that as we trade and as we move across borders and across boundaries, we can also begin to build a tourist economy that delivers for our populations and delivers for our youth. As we do tourism, we also have to concentrate on manufacturing. The AfCFTA will accelerate industrialization of the region, as manufacturing will be among the principal beneficiaries of an increase in inter-regional trade and investment. Currently, a lot of our manufactured goods that we consume on the continent are imported. As we all know, and as we've all been watching the news, many of Africa's countries, including in East Africa, are suffering from high debt burdens. We cannot continue to maintain high current account deficits if we want to create growth. Therefore, we need to be able to manufacture on the continent, trade amongst ourselves. I'll give you one example of a report that the ECA did last year on the pharmaceutical sector. Africa together is about 25% of the health burden in the world. We contribute 2% to the economy of the health sector. That is because, as a continent, we import $14.7 billion worth of drugs from without the continent. We can produce those drugs on the continent. We can market those drugs on the continent. That is the promise of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, that from Kenya to Eritrea to Ethiopia, we can work together to ensure that we develop supply chains that can produce those drugs on the continent and create jobs across the supply chain. The value of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is not just that we have manufacturing in one country, but it is that we build the supply chain across the sub-region. And that is why when we talk about the CFTA, we also talk about free movement. Because when you can move freely from Rwanda to Kenya, to Eritrea, to Ethiopia, to Sudan and South Sudan, you begin to talk about how you develop a supply chain that uses the ports, that uses the entry products from Kenya, that transforms in Ethiopia, that ships through Eritrea, and whose destination is Tanzania. That is the benefit of the Free Trade Area Agreement. And I think that is what we are here to talk about today. We want to go down into the details. We want to explain to you what it means to have trade offers, how we should work on issues of rules of origin. We know, and I'm sure you have all been watching the news and reading the news about some of our countries that are closing their borders because of the question of rules of origin. It is an important question, and it must be taken seriously. And we are grateful to our trade ministers for looking at this issue and for working on it. With the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we do not intend to open the continent to goods from outside the continent. We intend to open the continent for production of goods on the continent. And I think that is why our ministers of finance, our colleagues at the ECA, and of course at the African Union that is spearheading and leading the work on the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, are taking the work on the rules of origin very seriously. This is, I think, the critical trademark of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. If we can work on ensuring that rules of origin are actually respected and work, then the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement will work. And I hope that as we have these conversations today, we can look at what is it that we need as a sub-region, first of all, and secondly, as a continent, to ensure that this will actually happen. As we discuss the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we cannot do it just as policymakers. Yes, it is important that our leaders lay the groundwork and give us the blueprint for the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. However, we need the private sector to be front and center for this to work. We need the private sector to create the jobs. We need the private sector to do the research, to be the one at the leading edge of opening new markets, creating new opportunities, and creating new investments. That is why, as part of the AfCFTA, we are also working, especially in our office in East Africa, with Trademark East Africa, with a lot of the UNCTAD, with UNIDO, and a lot of our UN agencies, WTO, to make sure that as we do this, we bring the private sector, first of all, Africa's private sector, the sub-regional private sector, into the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. And as we have these conversations today, I hope that as we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, as we talk about tourism, we also talk about the single African air transport market and how we can ensure that we open our skies and open our ports so that movement of our goods is seamless as we go forward. We must also talk with civil society. We must ensure that civil society is a part and parcel of the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, because they will also be part of ensuring, as we create the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, we must ensure that we create policies that do not create monopolies. We want competition. We do not want more monopolism on the continent. So civil society must stand its guard and must ensure that as we build these economies, we build them in a way that is equitable. We build them in a way, as we see in many of the countries outside of our continent, if we do trade agreements that are not equitable, that are not balanced, over time citizens realize, and over time we lose the peace that the AfCFTA was supposed to produce, because we create inequalities. Inequalities are becoming an important part of Africa's economics, and we need to understand how to ensure that we level the playing field and we create more equal societies, even as we ensure that we grow economically and share the wealth and the prosperity. So I think as we gather here today to talk about regional, we want to grow as a continent, we want to grow at 10%. We would like that when we meet, as Agenda 2030 says, in the next 10 years, the GDP per capita of every African country is sufficient to ensure prosperity for the continent. However, we must make sure that it happens in an equitable way, and it happens in a way where Eritreans, Ethiopians, Tanzanians, and Ugandans can say that we are all trading and consuming the same good, and that the iPhone and the Samsung, this is an inside joke, and the iPhone and the Samsungs that we use for our connectivity are no longer only produced in the East, but as we see now, we have the Mara factory in Kenya that has begun to produce iPhones. We hope that our telephone systems and our internet communication systems will be produced on the continent, and it will allow us, as part of realizing the CFTA dream, to use DRC's cobalt to put in a phone that is produced in Kenya and that is used in Eritrea to make sure that we can connect. On that note, I want once again to thank everybody for coming to Eritrea, for coming to have this conversation with us, and for working collectively. I think as we finish, and we were talking with Andrew, we would like to have the East Asia region as the region that has all the 14 countries sign the CFTA. We are not there yet. So part of what we want to do in this next few days is to explain, to have this dialogue with countries that have not signed. We know there's a few of you that are on your way to ratification, but we would love that by the time we have the next summit, we have a lot more countries in the sub-region. Today we have 8. We hope that we can have maybe another half of you coming together with us. We hope that collectively, when we stand tall by July of 2020, we will have all of the EAC region coming together for the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. As ECA, we put all of our services at your disposal. Our job is essentially to answer your questions, to give you the statistics, to give you the numbers, so that you can make the case for yourselves, for your policymakers, so you can bring your private sector and your civil society along to say, yes, indeed, Africa does not need a Marshall Plan. Africa has the AfCFTA, which is, I think, a much more powerful investment proposal, a much more powerful job-creating instrument, a much more powerful regional and continental integration instrument. And so we hope that together, the architecture of what is collectively our common destiny can begin to be shaped here in the state of Eritrea, in the beautiful city of Asmara. Thank you again for listening.
In Tajikistan, when I worked in Tajikistan, studied in the Tajik University. I prepared learning a teacher.
We could have met.
Yes, actually. Honorable Dr. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, Honorable Ministers and Senior Government Officials, distinguished delegates and invited. invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you all to the beautiful city of Asmara, which is often referred to as Africa's jewel of modernity. Indeed, it is with immense gratitude and honor that the people and government of Eritrea are hosting the 23rd meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee of Senior Officials and Experts of the Economic Commission for Africa, which is sub-regional for Eastern Africa. In this regard, I would like to thank for the Sub-Regional Office for Eastern Africa for providing us the opportunity to host this timely and important event. I would like also to recognize the outgoing chair of the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts, the Republic of Rwanda, for steering ably the work of the 22nd meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts. Distinguished delegates, at the theme of this gathering insinuate Africa in general and the Eastern Africa region in particular has remarkable potential and capabilities to leverage on and expedite for regional integration. Our sub-region, the Horn of Africa, after decades of externally induced inter- and intra-state conflicts, has begun to breathe air of hope and togetherness, peace and stability, critical prerequisite for regional integration, is a new opportunity that we can leverage on for regional integration. Evidently, central to the recent hopeful environment prevailing in our region is a landmark peace deal signed between His Excellency President Isaias Afwerki and His Excellency Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed last year here in Asmara. The peace dividend of this historic event can simply be attested by the consequential engagements undertaken among the leaders and peoples of the sub-region in the past 15 months. The leaders of Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, South Sudan, Sudan, and Kenya have reaffirmed their strong commitments to work together and realize the aspirations of their brotherly peoples. Indeed, this is what we need to capitalize on as we envisage materializing regional integration. Distinguished delegates, the combined human and natural resources of our region are significantly enormous to transform the lives of each individual person. Apparently, these resources are not the ends by themselves. The lofty ideals of regional economic integration might seem appealing on blueprints. However, it is judicious to design pragmatic policies and measurable projects without transforming our existing infrastructural capacities, both human and physical, be it regional trade or economic integration, will remain wishful and incomprehensible. Transformation and improvements of our connectivity through roads, railways, seaports, airports, pipelines, etc., will inevitably entail substantial financial and human capital, as well as technological and energy capacities. To put in place all these inputs, we should primarily value and mobilize our domestic resources. Africa has already enough lessons for falling victim of global financial institutions and corporate conglomerates. Distinguished delegates, for its part, Eritrea has been engaged in implementing transformative developmental policies and projects driven by its internal capacities to ensure the delivery of basic social services such as health, water, education, transportation, and livelihood. Significant policy measures have been executed. At this momentous peacetime, the can-do spirit of the Eritrean people and the government of Eritrea have embarked on to regain lost opportunities and attain a viable socio-economic transformation in the coming few years. Distinguished delegates, it is in the following 3 days, as we reflect on the new opportunities for regional integration, we have to be mindful of the interdependency of every single sector, and we need to create synergies to ensure coherence and sustainability. All the thematic areas identified in our program of work are topical, and I hope our deliberations would galvanize to unlock the shared opportunities and potentials in our region. Eritrea's view of regional integration is guided by simple and doable vision, and that is building strong regional blocs. We should not be trapped in overlapping and ambitious regional gatherings and forums. Gauging our real capabilities entails prudence. Distinguished delegates, finally, while I trust the success of the 23rd meeting of the Intergovernmental Committee of Senior Officials and Experts, I hereby officially open the meeting. I wish you all very successful deliberations and a pleasant stay. I thank you.